So I'm really looking forward to tonight. We've got Poetry East with Mimi Khalvati launching her Carcanet Collected Poems, this wonderful book. It's a sort of thrice exciting evening because it's the launch of her collected poems, it's the year of her 80th birthday, and it's the occasion of the King's Gold Medal for poetry. So really good evening. So I'm going to be talking to her about her work, and she's going to be reading from her collected poems. Hope you enjoy it.
This is, well, for those of you who don't know me, I was sent from Iran, from Tehran, where I was born. So I was put on a plane and sent to England to go to boarding school on the Isle of Wight, in Shanklin specifically. And I really can't remember anything much about my first 6 years. And I was trying to remember actually that journey, because I mean 6 isn't that young really, but in my life experience I might as well have been 2 for all I remember. And I just had a vague memory of the sensation of being on this plane, of feeling a bit bewildered but sort of thinking, oh, it's all right, don't worry, it'll be okay, kind of thing. So this is on the plane. There's a Farsi word, which was my first language, and the word is kamar band. It means belt, but of course it's our word, or your word I should say, for kammerband. And it's been quite interesting to me over the years to actually recognise how many words come from the Farsi. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Yeah. Questions. You're smaller than you were, or so you think. You don't remember sinking quite so low on other seats. Something has made you shrink, or else something has made the seat back grow. You're a normal child, if a bit bewildered, struggling to push the feelings down, the questions, the stillborn questions never to be answered, stretching to see a sky that simply darkens, flying away from all you know with you and someone sitting next to you, but who? The only ones not gone or disappearing. It's normal to feel trust, and you do, don't you? Trust is a kind of seatbelt, stretching, shrinking. A camel band. You'll soon forget you're wearing.
I mean, in a way that feels like it sort of starts with like almost an origin story, doesn't it?
I don't know, darling.
It's like somehow, for me, that's almost where the story starts. I know it doesn't.
Yeah,
start there, but,
it does. Yeah.
With that strange sense of being on that plane at the age of 6, and when you arrived in England, you didn't know anyone in England. There were no relatives in England.
No, I assume I must have been sent with somebody in charge or wearing one of those labels or something. I don't know. Yeah.
So I thought, whilst we're on origin stories, I thought I'd ask you to read the first section of an early poem, The Bowl, an important poem, which I thought would be good to tell the story of this poem, because it was one of your first readings or something like that, and I thought it'd be good to tell that story, because another origin story in a way. In fact, in this time, the origins of poetry more.
Would you like me to read just the first section?
Yes, I was thinking just the first section.
With the epigraph?
Probably not with the epigraph. You could explain the epigraph, I wonder. It's a long epigraph.
It's a long one, anyway. Yeah, this was... I can't remember if it was the first poem I had published or not, but I do remember it was very early on that I had it published in Poetry Review. And actually I was incredibly green. I had no idea what Poetry Review was or anything about it. And I'd barely ever been to a poetry reading, so I didn't really know what happened or anything. Anyway, and it was at the old Poetry Society in Earl's Court. So I arrived there. I was so terrified, I can't tell you. So then I had to stand up to read. one of my buttocks, not both of them, were trembling so much that I actually then had to sit down. I had to do the reading sitting down because it would just go like that. It's never happened to me before or since.
How old were you then, Carl?
About 85, I don't know. 40 something.
Yeah, so it wasn't when
it
you
wasn't
were...
an innocent young little thing. No, I was this 45-year-old middle-aged woman. Yeah, that's it. So this bowl, this poem called The Bowl, I've no idea where it came from. But as they say, this image of this bowl just suddenly swam into my ken, as it were. And I had no idea what it was or anything. So really, I wrote this poem, which is a short sequence, to discover, what is this? Anyway, it was something to write about, basically. The bowl is big and blue. A flash of leaf along its rim is green, spring green, lime and herringbone. Across the glaze where fish swim, across the loose-knit waves in hopscotch black, borders of fisheye and cross-stitch, chestnut trees throw shadows, candles, catafalques and barks and Lord knows what ghost of ancient seacraft, what river-going name we give to shadows. Inside the bowl, in clay and earth and limestone, beneath the dust and loam, leaf forms lie, fossilised. They have come from mountain passes, from orchards where no water runs, or fields with only threadbare shade for mares and mule foals. They are named cuneiform and ensiform, spathulate and sagittate, and their margins are serrated, lapidary, lobed. This was before the days of Wikipedia. Nevertheless, my book of botany is green, the gloss of coach paint, carriages, babushka dolls, the clouded genie jars of long ago. Inside my bowl, a womb of air revolves. What tadpole of the stream, what holly spine of seahorse could be nosing at its shallows? What honeycomb of sunlight, marbled green of malachite, be cobbled in its hoop? I squat, I stoop. My knees are either side of bowl. My hands are eyes around its crescent. The surface of its story feathers me. My ears are all a rumour. On a skyline I cannot see, a silhouette carves vast shapes into sky. Baby, belly, breast, thigh. An aeroplane I cannot hear has shark fins, and 3 black camels sleep in a blue, blue desert. Well, I was none the wiser what this book was reading.
I mean, what strikes me rereading this is just how assured it is for a first collection. And you look, I mean, it's so assured. It's very, very ambitious as a poem. It's not like a newcomer's poem. It's very ambitious, very assured, and it discovers your voice completely, doesn't it? Some of those lines, they're very much the music of Mimi Khalvati.
Is it?
Yeah. I think of that one.
I think other people hear one's voice more than you hear it yourself, yes. Maybe.
Yeah, like that. What river-going name we give to shadows.
Yes,
I don't know what river-going name we give to shadows.
That's one of the better lines.
But it's so like your voice, that.
Yes, yes. I mean, I would never write with so much imagery and sort of frilliness now, you know. That was an early kind of, just lay it all on, you know. Over-decorated, over-embroidered, I'd say. But I enjoyed it, you know. I like doing it. Yes, it's you move from Keats to Hopkins or something, hopefully. I mean, later Hopkins, of course.
How did you get to be sort of so ambitious so early for poetry?
I was so green. I don't think I knew I was being ambitious. I just thought this was how it was. I mean, I was two things. I was very green. I was very aware of my ignorance about poetry. So I started writing late. I honestly didn't intend to write poetry. I mean, I never in my life thought, oh, I want to be a poet. I mean, I've got more sense.
True.
So there I was thinking, well, I don't know anything about poetry. I'd better learn as much as I can, as quickly as I can, kind of thing. So that was the place out of which I was writing. So everything was a kind of, oh, I'll try this, I'll learn this, I'll apply this and see what happens, kind of thing. So I didn't think in terms of ambition. Actually, I still don't think in terms of ambition. I can't be bothered with that shit.
You've never been like that. So I was thinking about you, especially, just knowing you now for so long, that you've got nothing to prove, I always think. Either in yourself as a person or in your work, you're not trying to prove something. I don't know whether that rings a bell.
Not in my poetry, no. Probably in other areas of my life, which I will tell you nothing about.
Let's move on. So were you, because you were an actress before this, and you say a little bit about that world you were in before. Hi there, come in, yes, come in. We might need to wiggle around to get you in. But keep going through that way and then go down the corridor in the middle, such as it is, and you will be squeezed in a friendly way. That's great.
Yes, I went to drama school. Actually, I wanted to be a theatre director. That's what I did want to be since I was about 13 at school. And but you couldn't go sort of do a course towards theatre directing in those days. So I had to go to drama school and do it through the acting route, kind of thing. So I did that. Then I did some acting for a short time. Then I did a few years of theatre directing in Iran. And in retrospect, I see that actually theatre directing is very similar to the work I do when I'm working with poets and mentoring and tutoring. Very similar, yeah. Well, in my case it was, yeah.
So let's move on to Rubaiyat, which is, I think, one of your most anthologized poems. A wonderful poem from your second collection? No, yes. First collection,
actually,
yeah.
First. Okay. Yeah, this poem is quite a key poem for me because it was the first poem in which I discovered the magic of form. And by form, I don't mean form in free verse, I mean metrical form. So, can I just say a little bit about it?
Yeah, you say as much as you like.
Oh, okay. So talking of theatre, actually, I was at home with my lovely children who were little then.
Not so little
so I
now.
couldn't really do... No, we won't go into that. I couldn't do theatre work, So somebody said, oh, go and do a writing course. And so I went on an Arvon script writing / poetry course, doing the script writing, or so I thought. And I took a script. And weirdly, I'm mentioning this because that radio script, which never came to anything, was the basis of this poem.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that a weird kind of transposition? So I had this sort of half-baked poem, and I had tried a rhyming scheme. For those of you who are into this kind of thing, So the rhyme went, originally it went A, 3 lines with the same rhyme, and then X, then not a rhyme. And I could not finish this poem. And one day I was in a bookshop, second-hand bookshop, which of course had a copy of what? Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Every second bookshop in the country has a copy of that, obviously. So I looked at it and I suddenly thought, the penny dropped. I thought, oh, this is the form my poem is supposed to be in, which would be not A, X, but A, XA. Switched 2 round. Went home within an hour. Bingo, that was it. Finished the poem. It's magic, isn't it? Well, I think it's magic.
Yeah, it is magic.
So rubaiyat, rubai is just in Persian poetry is a quatrain. Rubaiyat is the plural for Telojun, my grandmother. Beyond the view of crossroads ringed with breath, her bed appears. The old rose covers death has smoothed and stilled. Her fingers lie inert. Her nail file lies beside her in its sheath. The morning's work over, her final chore was breaking up the sugar just before siesta, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, her slippers lying neatly by the door. The image of her room behind the pane, though lost as the winding road shifts its plane, returns on every straight, like signatures we trace on glass, forget and find again. I have inherited her tools, her anvil, her axe, her old scrolled mat, but not her skill. And who would choose to chip at sugar loaves when sugar cubes are boxed beside the till? The scent of lilacs from the road reminds me of my own garden. A neighbouring tree grows near the fence. At night, its clusters loom like lantern moons, pearly white, unearthly. I don't mind that the lilac's roots aren't mine. Its boughs are, and its blooms. It curves its spine towards my soil and litters it with dying stars. Deadheads I gather up like jasmine. My grandmother would rise and take my arm, then sifting through the petals in her palm would place in mine the whitest of them all. Salam, dokhtar mah man, salam. Salam, my daughter lovely as the moon. Would that the world could see me, Telojun, through your eyes. Or that I could see a world that takes such care to tend what fades so soon.
A good moment to say a little bit about your grandmother. Because she couldn't speak English, she only had one English word, didn't she?
Oh yes, she had one English word, and that word was lovely. And she said it in 3 syllables. It was so sweet, she said. Mimi June. June is a suffix that you just put on the end of people's names. Just means dear, so Maitreya Bando June. A bit of a mouthful. Yeah. So she would say everything, Mimi June, lovely. And I would say, yes, Telojun, lovely.
Because you spent a year, how long?
I spent about 2.5 years living with her in Iran when I was in my late 20s.
And only one word between you, really, because could you speak?
Well, at one point I spoke no Farsi at all, so it was just lovely. That was it.
It's good.
It's all you need, really.
You don't need that much more.
Yes, yeah. And then at some point I sort of learnt Farsi, and not absolutely fluently, but enough to say more than lovely.
Right. Yeah.
Not lovely. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So let's move on to the workroom, which is from Mirror Work. One of the things that's very striking about looking at this collected poems, and it's so wonderful, isn't it, to have it all together so we can see it all in one go, is just how easily you move from metre and rhyme and strict forms, which we'll hear more of, to free verse. I can't think of many poets that do that. I'm thinking of Tom Gunn. He moves, but I don't think his free verse is as good as his metered verse. But so you might say something about about that movement to free verse as well?
Wow, that's quite a difficult question in a way. It is sort of, it's kind of same and different at the same time. I find mostly the difference is speed, actually, because free verse, I write very fast. And usually I just go blah, 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 and then I edit it and lineate it and so on, and that's it. Metrical verse, I go line by line by line. So just this very different kind of approach. So when you write very fast, and then of course you edit a lot, I could write maybe 4 pages and edit it down to half a page maybe, or 2 pages, whatever. But in metrical verse that doesn't really happen. I aim to end up, even in the first draft, as close to the final one as possible. As the years have gone by, maybe I just become more lazy, but I manage to do that more often. Yeah.
So let's hear this poem, and then we'll perhaps get you to say a little bit about this sequence, because this is actually taken out of a sequence of interiors after We Are, so it'd be good to say a bit about that.
We Are is a post-impressionist painter, Edouard Vuillard. He's one of my favourite, if not my absolute favourite painter. I don't know why exactly. Well, no, I won't say a lot because about why, that's not particularly relevant. But this sequence is sort of based very much on his work, and he had he painted these screens, large kind of screens that you would just screen off part of the room or whatever. And so the form of this poem, the actual poem is called Interiors, and it's quite long, and it's divided into lots of different sections. And some of the sections are, in a sense, a replica of these sort of screens, as it were, if that makes sense. So one of them, the one I'm reading, is this right? Am I doing what you asked me to do?
I think so. The workroom. I've
The workroom.
Yeah, that's right. I've got it open.
Oh, okay, yeah. And we are, yes, his studio, his painting studio was in the home, and in the home were also the seamstresses. So that the work of the seamstresses and his work as a painter and everything were all sort of muddled up together, which was really rather lovely. And I think his work is very reminiscent of textiles and the work of sewing and seamstresses and so on. So it's all very intricately structured. It's quite a long poem sequence. And the one I'm going to read is called The Workroom. And these are 4 sort of poems. I see them shaped like the panels, like the screens that he used. I think that's all I need to say about that. Of course, my grandmother, we were talking about, is behind this whole sequence, really. Partly because Vuillard lived with his mother. They were very close. And his mother looked bizarrely like my grandmother in her paintings. And they seemed like very similar kind of characters. And I was very close to my grandmother, although really I didn't know her that well. I'd only lived with her 2 or 3 years. So this is the workroom of the seamstresses. It was in the whirring of a treadle, biting of a thread, in the resumption of the treadle, while eyes were closed and shadows of the scissors like the noon sun through its zenith were passing overhead, that allegiances were fed their rhythms, loyalties first given shape. With a lever sprung, a length released, launched in its wake on a sea of stuffs, flecks of wool, waves of walnut grain, receiving food, receiving drink. We gave the thanks we never knew in time we would strive to give, to keep alive in words, in songs, in paint. It was in these gestures, the day's devotions, with a pock-marked thumb, pinheads jammed in a mouth that held them safe, that an inheritance was slowly stitched, a paradigm to give body to, like a second life to curtains, a lining to a dress. And now, when prayers we never knew were prayers, in the guise of silver bobbins, machines we never mastered, are once again in currency, in the hands of daughters, making light of the partnering, unpartnering of threads, when voices caught, then thought lost in transit, while ours, in vows, were still keeping faith, return in transpositions, in a dream like a revelation, familial as they were in life, to orchestrate our states of grace. How can we not fail them? What sacraments can we find but these poor leavings of a memory, of a home, a time, a place?
That's great, Mimi. That's really lovely. Should we press on?
Yes.
Yeah, so let's now go to your poem Villanelle from the Chine, which is again a very important poem. All the times I've asked you to read, I always ask you to read this poem. I think in every.
I know I've read it so many times, and the form itself has so many repetitions. Can you remember? Can you imagine how many times those lines got read?
Yeah. So perhaps, do you want to say something a bit about the villanelle as a form? Because you've written two, I think.
I think lots of people here have
all
probably written them.
You've all
have
written
you?
them.
Yes, lots of people.
You've
Some
all
people
written
nodding.
Yeah.
Well, suffice to say, it just repeats itself ad infinitum, you know, so don't think, well, why she keeps saying that? This book, honestly, is quite hard to hold. I'm really struggling with it.
Well, it's quite substantial, isn't it?
Oh, God. Finding your way around it. Just a minute. That's not right. I've got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, not a lot to say about this poem. I have very few memories of my first 6 years in Iran. You know, I mean, virtually none, really. I have a vague memory of being alone in the house at night, which I thought would be a bit odd, because, I mean, that would have been before the age of 6. And I did check it out with my mum. She thought it was perfectly normal. So she said, yes, you were a very good girl, darling. So here's the dreaded villanelle. No one is there for you. Don't call, don't cry. No one is in, no flurry in the air. Outside your room are floors and doors and sky. Clock speeded, slowed, not for you to question why. Tick on, trust them, be good, behave, don't stare. No one is there for you. Don't call, don't cry. Cries have their echoes. Echoes only fly back to their pillows, flocking back from where outside your room are floors and doors and sky. Imagine daylight. Daylight doesn't lie, Fool with your shadows, tell you nothing's there, no one is there for you, don't call, don't cry. But daylight doesn't last. Today's came by to teach you the dimensions of despair. Outside your room are floors and doors and sky. Learn, when in turn they turn to you, to sigh and say, you're right, I know, life isn't fair. No one is there for you. Don't call, don't cry. Outside your room are floors and doors and sky.
That's really wonderful. That's really wonderful. It's also a subtly political poem, isn't it? In another key. It's a very personal poem, but it's also a subtly political poem, isn't it? It's your whispered...
I'm glad you think it's subtle. Yes, it was actually written during the Thatcher years. Yeah. It was, yes. I can't write direct political poems. I just can't. But I sort of go round the houses, you know. So this was about the so-called caring society, you know. And that's actually was the impetus for this poem.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I did consciously think, oh, people are always saying I don't write political poems, so I do write... So I'll do one a bit more sort of direct. Failure.
Not at all, not at all. So we were chatting the other day, and you said we're going to have a little few of you reading them all together now, with a rather than me continually interjecting and asking you things. So first of all, listening to Strawberry from the Chine, and then Song, which I was insistent on putting in, and then we'll have 2 ghazals, and then we'll have a cup of tea. You always need tea after a ghazal.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Okay, so this is where I just sort of go off on one.
Yeah, this is when you go off on one.
Okay, lovely. Oh, he's done all the work, you see. So, this is listening to Strawberry. Strawberry was gorgeous. He was our English teacher at school, and his real name was Aubrey de Selincourt. Of course, he's a very renowned scholar and writer, and also he was a very successful children's author as well. But he was also just gorgeous, you know. Anyway, he taught us English literature. That's all I need to say, I think. And so this is called Listening to Strawberry, for Aubrey Strawberry de Selincourt. I knew it as the poetry I could never hear without his voice to give it utterance, and the way it ran inside me was clearer, closer than the way it ran in others, though they loved it too, owned it too, but owning so much else, loved it that much less. Owning so little now, I recall how he drew it out with pipe smoke, through long crossed legs, out of the earth, as if he, so long and lean, were a brook for the vowels to run through, knocking consonants like little stones to quaver in their wake. Certainty can quaver too, and still retain its faith. Outcast, in its deepest spells of orphanhood, the soul can recall through memories of grass and place a shaking hand on a pipe's bowl that indicates a turn of phrase, an undertow to weather, a companionship that, being human, echoing high in leafy woods, confiding low when at our lowest, deprived of human company, makes deprivation sweet to bear. And for those of us who heard him in our girlhoods, when girlhood was still a word to stand for a kind of kingdom, a wreath around our heads, it was a binding that netted us together, like wild strawberries never safe from bird or hand. A murmur I can still remember, with or without remembering the words. He had this most lovely voice, and he'd just be going on like this. That's where my love of poetry came from, that probably, yeah. It's lovely. Oh yes, I'm supposed to read another one. Sorry, I'm carried away thinking of Strawberry. With his pipe and his tweeds. It was quite douchey though.
Always helps.
Doesn't it? Song. I have landed as if on the wing of a small plane. It is a song I have landed on that barely feels my weight. Sky is thick with wishes. Regrets fall down like rain. Visit me. I'm always in, even when the place looks empty, even though the locks are changed. I'm not that nice, you see. The gazals. Now we come to gazals. Oh, they can join in, can't they? So they're sitting so quietly and nicely. Would you like to join in? Yes. You'll soon see when and how. It's dead simple. To join in, not so much to write. Okay, just a couple of words. The radif, it's Farsi word, it's the word for the refrain that comes in the form of the gazal. The gazal apparently is related to our word for gazelle, which is quite nice, isn't it? Yeah. And I think the gazal as a poetic form has been described as the cry of a wounded deer, or gazelle. Yeah. What was I saying? Yes, the Farsi words. Yeah. So the radif is the refrain, which is fairly obvious what it is. And then my name, Khalvati, pronounced properly for a change by me, I discovered quite late in my life, because my Farsi is a bit rubbish. So the word Khalvat is an adjective meaning quiet, which I knew because it's very simple and colloquial. But then I learnt much later that a Khalvati is like a spiritual place of retreat, Maitreya Bandhu. Here we're sitting in a Khalvati. Isn't that amazing? Oh, I love that. So you ready? Okay, I do the first couplet, then you join in. When you wake to jitters every day, it's heartache. Ignore it, explore it. Either way, it's heartache. Youth's a map you can never refold. From Yokohama to Hudson Bay, it's heartache. Follow the piper, lost on the road. Whistle the tune that led him astray. It's heartache. Stop at the roadside. Name each flower, the loveliness that will always stay. It's heartache. Why do nightingales sing in the dark? Ask the radif. It will only say, it's heartache. Let Khalvati, a quiet retreat, close my ghazal and heal as it may. It's heartache. Lovely, thank you.
You're going to sing.
Oh yes, sorry. I'm so well trained, you see, to just do what I'm told. I have to keep going back to you for instructions. Okay, one more.
But it might be worth saying something about that. It actually came to you fairly late, this form, and people tend to think that you sort of grew up with it almost. But
Well, they tend to think I only ever write ghazals, actually.
Right, yeah,
Most people, you know.
You become the queen of the ghazal.
I've written all this. There's not ghazals.
I think how many have you written? 9 or 10?
Only 9 or 10,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
I've written about 100 sonnets or whatever.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to know about those. They're not exotic. I want to be held, is that the one, isn't it? Yes, okay. Okay, so, yeah, there's a, you know, the last couplet is called the signature couplet, and you have to name yourself. I think originally this was a form of copyright, actually. But now it's just become part of the sort of form. It's very embarrassing. I mean, you try it, you know, to suddenly say, Mimi thinks blah, blah, or whatever. You know, so one tries all these different ruses. So in this case, I resorted to La Bohème, where Mimi, of course, is the main protagonist with Rodolfo, her lover. You can't join in this one. Actually, it's interesting because some of them I write specifically to cue the audience. You see what I mean? So that they can join in. Because traditionally, if you were doing it in Iran, you know, and you had the gathering and everything, they don't join in with all the refrains on. But some of them I've done specifically to invite a kind of audience joining in, and some I haven't. I want to be held. I want somebody near to hold me. When the axe falls, time is called. Strangers appear to hold me. I want all that has been denied me, and more, much more than God in some lonely stratosphere to hold me. I want hand and eye, sweet roving things, and land for grazing, praising, and the last pioneer to hold me. I want my ship to come in, crossing the bar, before my back's so bowed, even children fear to hold me. I want to die being held, hearing my name thrown like a rope from a very old pier to hold me. I want to catch the last echoes, reel them in, like a curing song in the creel of my ear to hold me. I want Rodolfo to sing, flooding the gods. Ah, Mimi! As if I were her, and he, here, to hold me.
Great, that's wonderful. Let's go and have a quick cup of tea and then we'll come back and hear some more wonderful poetry. So what we'll do is, again, we'll plunge into some more poems, and what will happen, we'll have some more poems, and we'll talk a bit more, and then Mimi, of course, will be only too keen to sign copies of her collected poems, which you can buy at the bookshop. But let's start off with this wonderful sonnet, not a ghazal, Come Close, from The Meanest Flower.
Yeah. Where's Marina? Yeah. Marina and I, we were talking, weren't we, how difficult it is to describe in words smells. Yeah, that's relevant. Come close. Come close, the flower says, and we come close, close enough to lift cup and smell the rose, breathe in a perfume deep enough to find language for it. But words having grown unkind, think back instead to a time before we knew what we know now, when every word was true and roses smelt divine. What went wrong? Long before the breath of a cradle song. Some lives fall, some flower, and some are granted birthrights, a veranda, a sunken quadrant of old rose trees, a fountain dry as ground, but still a fountain, in sense if not in sound. Like a rose she slept in the morning sun, each vein a small blue river, each eyelash shone. It's a poem for my daughter who's here tonight. She was born in Tehran.
Beautiful poem. Moving from your daughter, let's go to your mother.
That's a hell of a move.
It's quite That means good to say, because when you were on that plane to England all that time ago, and you didn't meet your mother again, I don't think, for 4 years after you were right. Is that right? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I basically grew up knowing my mother as this very glamorous, exotic sort of foreign person. I never realised I was the foreign person. It's all very strange. And she was very, I didn't see her much. I saw her maybe every 4 years or something like that, so I didn't really know her. But she was just very glamorous. Is the word that comes to mind.
I sort of remember you describing her with white fur and red.
Yes, she had beautiful long red nails and white fur, like those movie stars. She was always, very elegant.
And she never talked to you about why you'd been sent to England, or
for a good education.
Right.
That was it. Maybe it was true. Well, in those days, of course, people did send their children to England for a good education. Might have been other things going on. Who knows? But anyway, the poem you've asked me to read next is my mum came over. She was very artistic, and she did a fine arts degree at St Martin's. Actually, in England, she came over and she did that, and she specialised in millinery and fashion, and also making artificial flowers. And she made them for Norman Hartnell, no less, who you won't know anything about, or do you?
Vaguely know the name.
Yeah, he did ball gowns for the royal family, the Queen. Very posh. Shall I read them? And I did live 1 year with her in the middle of my childhood when she was at St Martin's. And she was making these artificial flowers, and I would have been about maybe 9 or something for that 1 year. Overblown roses. She held one up, twirling it in her hand, as if to show me how the world began and ended in perfection. I was stunned. How could she make a rose so woe-begone? Couldn't silk stand stiff? And how could a child, otherwise convinced of her mother's taste, know what to think? It's overblown, she smiled. I love roses when they pass their best. Overblown roses. The words rang in my head, making sense as I suddenly saw afresh the rose now, the rose ahead, where a petal clings to a last breath, where my mother's flesh and mine, going the same way, may still be seen as beautiful, if these words are said.
That's a lovely poem. I wonder whether there's more to say about your mother.
Oh, there's lots more to say. She was a wonderful storyteller, and she told us, didn't she, Tom, my son's there, loads of these wonderful stories about her childhood and her background in Iran. I mean, it was never anything to do with me. If I asked her, she'd sort of veer away, and, you know. But fabulous stories, and I can't remember a single one of them. It's terrible, terrible loss, isn't it? I bet you can't remember either. No, we're hopeless. As a family, our memory is hopeless.
And then just before we go on, just this experience, you know, it is quite striking. You know, you're at school in the Isle of Wight as a child, and you literally had no English. You know,
when I arrived,
when you arrived,
no, not a word.
You know, it's unthinkable of having a 6-year-old in a school with no English. I mean, we'll come to this when we get to Afterwardness, but you know, you couldn't have read the signs. You wouldn't know what was going on at first.
No, it's very strange. I mean, what's more strange to me is why I never think of it as strange until I got quite old. And looking back, and I suddenly thought, oh God, that's weird. You know, I really didn't. It's taken me many, many years to, and I'm still in the process of sort of seeing the strangeness, seeing the things that weren't there. Or that I didn't have, or I don't mean it, in the sense of terrible deprivation or something, but I mean just normal things, you know.
It's something important, isn't it, to understand that experience, because people easily say, here's what that experience must have been like for you.
I think that's something I have struggled with. In fact, it's interesting you say that, because rather than my thinking, oh God, it was terrible, oh God, it was strange, I've always struggled with other people's perceptions and assumptions, which are fair enough. I mean, it's a very weird experience, so you have to imagine something, you know. And they're always sort of off kilter. And secretly, I used to maybe think, or maybe even didn't dare to think, but sort of hovering somewhere in my mind was, well, actually, it wasn't really like that, you know. So I think the experience, I think people will think, of terrible loss and terrible missing your mum and crying into your pillow at night and, you know, really sort of felt things. My experience, of course, was the opposite of things you didn't feel, you know, so that's been my big thing of not feeling, which of course, I suppose that's something to do with it, obviously. But also just other effects that in retrospect I've kind of discovered in a way, and quite late in life, because I've never been that interested in my story.
Like in a later poem we'll come to in a minute, but you know, you talk about children crying and it being like a treat they would give themselves.
That's in a poem. Because he knows my poems so well.
Well, I read them.
That's such a gift. It's such a gift.
You know.
Yeah, well, I never cried. Of course, I suppose, you know, you could go into the whole sort of psychology of all of that and so on. But yes, I do say I thought it was a treat that the children gave themselves when they'd already had lots of other treats.
They were also allowed to cry.
Yeah.
I thought that.
I don't think it was because I never was allowed to cry. It was just, I suppose, more that you just somehow were in the mode that you just had to get on with it, you know.
Of course, yeah. Anyway, let's get to your middle tone, because in a way that's a good segue to the middle tone, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Which is one of, you know, my many favourite poems of yours, which again is always a poem I ask you to read. From the Meanest Flower, which is a wonderful collection, isn't it, the Meanest Flower? It was your collection that was shortlisted for the Elliot. Should have won, of course, but there we go.
I'm so glad you like this one. You know how one's relationship, as many of you will know, with your own work, it's very, you know, oh, I don't really like that one, or that was rubbish, or that was all right, and da-da-da. This poem I actually like, and it's maybe because it's really short. And it does have an epigraph, which is also short, which I will read. It's sort of ars poetica, this poem. It's called The Middle Tone. And the epigraph is from Lorca. Seldom do we Andalusians notice the middle tone. An Andalusian either shouts at the stars or kisses the red dust of the road. The middle tone does not exist for him. He sleeps right through it. You enjoy that, don't you, John? Just so, I spend my life asleep. Stars, if there are, might shine above, and dust that I've always loved, now dirt at most I lightly sweep. But canto, I too exist. My middle tone of dung and nectar, flower and carrion, is a star that fell. Dust I too once kissed. Sweet, isn't it?
It's lovely. It's just lovely, isn't it?
I like finishing a poem on the word kissed.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to read it again?
Yeah.
I think it should go on.
You read it.
No, I'm not going to read it. You read it. You're a better reader than me.
Okay, I won't read the epigraph again then. The middle tone. Well, I have to in a way. The middle tone does not exist for him. He sleeps right through it. Just so I spend my life asleep. Stars, if there are, might shine above, and dust that I've always loved, now dirt, at most I lightly sweep. But canto, I too exist. My middle tone of dung and nectar, flower and carrion, is a star that fell. Dust I too once kissed.
I mean, it's also just like a brilliant example of the use of form with A, B, B, A form, and that envelope form, I think it's sometimes called.
Envelope stanza.
You know, that rhyme going from exist to kiss across those two. Anyway, it's just a very good. You could do a little study on form on the poem, I think.
Thank you. Isn't he lovely?
But let's move on to these two poems. I'd like to have chosen more from the Weather Wheel, which is, we were just chatting beforehand. I think for me, it's Mimi's most exuberant collection. It's a free verse book written in couplets, all the same amount of couplets. How many? 16 lines, is it? Something like that?
16,
yeah,
yes.
That's right. But full of freshness, full of exuberance. Anyway, so let's hear, I'd like to hear lots more, but we can't be here all night. So let's have just two of them, I think, and I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thank you. I had fun writing this book. My mum actually died during the writing of it. So sort of poems for her or touching on her kind of were interwoven through the book. But I think you're right, it's actually a more exuberant book than you'd think. Now, where did I have this lovely quote I've written? Have we got time if I read that?
Yeah, of course.
Are you sure? Because it's one of my favourite quotes and it'd be familiar to you. It's from Virginia Woolf's, what's it called? The Sketch of the Past, I think. So I'll just read it very quick, okay? If life has a base that it stands upon, if it is a bowl that one fills and fills and fills, then my bowl without a doubt stands upon this memory. It is of lying half asleep, half awake, in bed in the nursery at St. Ives. It is of hearing the waves breaking, 1, 2, 1, 2, and sending a splash of water over the beach, and then breaking 1, 2, 1, 2 behind a yellow blind. It is of hearing the blind draw its little acorn across the floor as the wind blew the blind out. It is of lying and hearing this splash and seeing this light and feeling it is almost impossible that I should be here. Of feeling the purest ecstasy I can conceive.
Love, isn't it?
Lovely, isn't it? There's no point reading my poem after that, is there? It's a poem in itself. Lovely. So this is called The Waves, and it's was written in Lutro in Crete, which I know some of you know and love. Every day the world is beloved by me, the seagull eager for its perch. I woke this morning to a darkened room, my soul stabled at the gate. We grow older, quieter, hearing degrees of movement, distance, and the dead would listen if they could to the voices of the living, as bedrock listens to the ocean. I listen to the waves, trying to make them go 1, 2, 1, 2, to hear what Virginia Woolf heard. But she heard it in memory, darling memory that delineates. 1, 2, 1, 2, and all the variable intervals in between, surrendering to the very integer Alice Oswald rhymed with water, creating a thumbhole through which to see the world. Light fluctuates, and my soul fluctuates like a jellyfish underwater. My hand throws animal shadows on paper, and there, outlined, is a single goat, black and white, standing on top of the mountain like a tiny church. And then I'll read this poem. It's called The Overmind. God, this book's really hard to manipulate, honestly. Can't hardly hold it up for a start. It makes your thumbs ache. It does if you've got arthritis in your thumbs. You try holding this on to Okay, so this this poem has got a reference to the poet H.D., who wrote this essay. What was it called? Notes on Thought and Vision, in which she wrote that consciousness, or maybe subconsciousness, was like was something she called the overmind, which was like a cap sitting on her head, like a jellyfish. I mean, poets are bonkers. The overmind. Even when I was a child, tears were something other children had. A permission I didn't understand other people gave. I thought the children gave it to themselves. A special treat when they'd already had their share. Mm-hmm. My overmind, as H.D. called it, isn't a jellyfish, a kind of swimming cap on my head. My overmind seems to be this sadness, and he'll always carry it. And it is a kind of hat, sky size, sky shape. I feel sorry for my smallness. Short trunk, short legs, sleeves rolled up, feet too large to be in proportion. When I sit and plant them squarely, side by side, like shoes with no one in them, I feel how flat they are and firm. If I were a pot, a round ceramic pot, with a mustard glaze on a whatnot, in the guest room or on an outside table, I'd be like H.D.'s Delphic charioteer, whose feet made a firm pedestal for himself, I'd be always balanced.
Yeah, just going back for a second, that line, darling memory that delineates. In a way, that's a bit of a little Ars Poetica for you, isn't it?
Yes, it
is. A little tiny, so that says a lot about the whole collected poems is darling memory that delineates. Darling memory delineates.
It is, especially as, one of my big main themes is memory, but specifically bad memory or bad biographical memory, which, as my children suffer from as well. I think we've inherited it. I'm so sorry. Well, now I've forgotten what I was going to say.
It's very form and content.
They are, you see. I lie not.
But darling, that delineates as well.
Yes, so darling memory, darling, partly because I don't have it. But when I do have it, it's all the more darling. But also, I think envy of people who have memory that does delineate. So I think there's a little bit of yearning in that phrase. Oh, I wish I had darling memory that delineates, sort of thing, yeah. It's a nice phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, beautiful phrase, yeah.
All those D's.
Yeah. So we're sort of coming to, not the end, but we're coming to the end, but we're going to hear a few poems from Afterwardness, which we started with Questions, which is the first sonnet at Afterwardness. Hopefully many of you have read Afterwardness already. It came out of a tricky time, didn't it? It came out just on the cusp of COVID.
Just before thingy. Yeah.
So, it was neither time to then do lots of readings because that was closing, but we hadn't started doing stuff online. So I've always felt it hasn't been quite noticed enough, because it basically just because of its moment in history. It just disappeared because you hadn't been able to do readings, that had stopped, but they hadn't started doing online things yet. For me, it's your most achieved collection. It's very different from The Weather Wheel. It's it's a rhymed Petrarchan sonnets. Anyway, you better talk about it, not me. I'm just chattering on.
No, I like you when you talk about it. But thank you very much for saying that. It's the first book that I've written not with some kind of apprenticeship type agenda in mind. So my other books, there was always some kind of next step in my apprenticeship. So for The Weather Wheel, we were talking that I was saying I wanted to enlarge my vocabulary. So every other word I was, into Wikipedia and all this and coming up with all these weird words, which was quite good fun. But then Afterwardness is the first collection I've written with a theme in mind. So I've never really been much interested in subject matter, but this one was very thematic. And the theme was from the word afterwardness, which is coined by Freud, roughly meaning, with hindsight, giving meaning to early trauma or displacement and seeing the after effects, if you like, in later life. And I was very interested in this, and yes. And there was that wonderful book called about third culture kids, which explores these effects. And these effects are not necessarily the ones you would imagine. And that's what interests me very much. Yeah. Is that enough? I don't know, did you?
And how do, perhaps say something, because it's a whole book-length series of rhyming sonnets. Every line rhymes, isn't it? In the book.
Yes, they're very formally strict, I'd say.
And why that? Because that's very, very difficult to pull off. Everyone says, I'm trying to break the rules of the sonnet by not rhyming, but it's actually much more difficult to
It's really, really hard to keep to the strict thing, basically.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing variations and so on. I mean, it's mostly taking license
Right,
and
yeah.
making life easier for yourself, to be honest. My experience anyway. Which is not to say I'm against that. I'm just saying this is easier for me to do than that. You know?
Yeah.
But I chose to keep strictly to the same form because I knew that the focus of each poem, you know, they would vary so much. I'd be jumping around from this to that, and I wanted that freedom. I wanted that randomness. I wanted to go wherever the next thing just came out of nowhere and hit me. But equally, I wanted them unified. So I just using the form as a unifying factor to allow me that very disparate kind of jumping aroundness.
I mean, that's very important to you, this. I mean, the poem on the page is very important to you, how they look on the page, how they sit on the page. And this, even think that the amount of lines, the formal considerations are very important to you, aren't they?
In free verse as well?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Well, I think that's what poetry is. Right. Otherwise, why not just write prose?
Right, yeah. I mean, every form, you know, like from the workroom, it's a definite reference back to Vuillard's panels, and then you've got the gazal, which is bringing the ecstatic voice back into poetry. Every form is very, very importantly creating content for you, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I don't know how else to do it, or why else to do it.
Right, yeah.
Really. Because I'm not obsessed with, I've got loads of things I want to say, or I don't have any polemical messages I'm dying to get off my chest or something.
And you're not confessional. You're not a confessional poet, are you really?
No. Wouldn't say so. No.
And rhyme?
Well, rhyme, I think most people who use rhyme love it because it takes you to places you wouldn't otherwise go. I think the whole of writing poetry is a battle with oneself to stop yourself thinking the same old thoughts, saying the same old things, and just being a walking cliche. You know, because really it's very difficult to think anything that hasn't been thought of and written about a million times. And same with emotions, you know. Well, yeah, we all have emotions, so it's a big deal, you know. That's for in life, you know. You deal with your own and other people's emotions and so on. So I don't see. Yeah, I think finding the form, whether it's in free verse, formal people always think it's just sonnets, but actually finding a form in a free verse can be just as difficult and challenging and exciting, you know, as in metrical verse, is the equivalent of finding the poem. And rhyme will shake, you know, take you out of your comfort zone, or to shake you out of your rut and force you to think something you hadn't thought of before. Because I think it's fatal just to come already with things you want to say and emotions that you've had and you want to express and experiences you want to replicate, and then think you're going to write a poem. No, it's not going to be a poem, sorry. It's maybe something else, you know. So everything has to be discovered, and things like form help you do that.
It's interesting because the contemporary idea of form is that it always restricts you, and that it forces you into an old-fashioned box.
Yes, it restricts you until you've learnt to use it well. And that's, it's on a, you know, yes, here. I mean, not only it restricts you, it so gags you. You can't say hardly anything because you're trying to rhyme when you first start, you know. And then it just goes like this, and it's quite restricting. And then suddenly you go, you know, and then it goes towards a freedom, and you discover that it's a wonderful liberator.
That's a great way of talking about form, isn't it? It's like a little workshop on form.
Yeah, I think lots of these ideas, such as form is restricting and so on, come from early practice
Mm.
of the art.
Mm. You mean by practitioners of the art?
Yes,
Yeah.
they have, well, from, not from the early stages of practicing the art.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And hold true if you haven't worked long enough and practiced hard enough, and I think that's always underestimated.
Right, yeah.
It takes years to learn to use rhyme well.
Mm. Mm.
And if you don't rhyme well, yes, of course it sounds awful. Well, of course it's a cliche. Well, of course it... Do you see what I mean? But it's an art like playing the violin or something, It takes years of practice, I would say. I know it's very unfashionable to do this because but bear with me, I'm 80 years old.
So let's hear two of the sonnets from Afterwardness, and then we'll have a little more of a chat, and then we'll have one more, I think.
Okay, but we'll cut it down a little. Which one would you like me to go?
I can never pronounce it.
Oh God, yes. Chameleonidae.
That's the one.
Chameleons, in other words.
Chameleonidae. There it goes, not so hard.
So this is one of the after effects in life that I was talking about, of that early displacement. And this is, being chameleon-like and being endlessly adaptable. So, it's not all negative. That's what I was interested in. This book is actually exploring some of the positive effects of my early experience, and not just assume that it's all about loss and that kind of thing. Chameleonidae. Why did I say I minded things I didn't? Soul-making things I'd find too crude to name, or silently collude with heartfelt, well-meant sympathy it seemed churlish to disclaim. There is no childhood house that I remember, no mother in it, merely surrogate houses with mothers in them but no daughter, where I would be their Alison or Kate. In whose name can I talk of roots, of ruptures? Melding with backgrounds, we fade into yours, muted, cryptic, old world chameleons. Lions of the ground, we swivel horizons. Stalking the rainbow, we emblazon its colours. These are our messages. These are emotions. And then the title poem I'll read. There's a Farsi word, Chahar Bagh, that literally means 4 gardens, but it's the Islamic model of like the Garden of Paradise in 4 quarters like that, divided by paths or rivers. Afterwardness. An 11-year-old boy from Aleppo, whose eyes hold only things no longer there, a citadel, a moat, safe rooms of shadow, afterwardness in his 1,000-yard stare, years later, decades even, might turn around to see through the long tunnel of that gaze a yard, a pond, and pine trees that surround, as in a Chahar Bagh, 4 branching pathways. Where do memories hide? The pine trees sing. In language, of course, the 4 pathways reply. What if the words be lost? The pine trees sigh. Lost, the echo comes, lost like me in air. Then sing, the pathways answer. Sigh and sing for the echo, for nothing, no one, nowhere.
Read that again, maybe, I think.
I can't.
Can you? You have to buy the book. I mean, one thing that strikes, going back to the is I wondered whether that's partly why Vuillard is so important to you, because the figures in Vuillard very often almost disappear into the wallpaper.
Yes, I mean, I totally relate to his. He doesn't paint from life, he paints from memory, and his paintings have that skewed effect of, you know, if you visually try to remember something, you can quite, you know, this sort of blurs into that, and you know, it's just wonderful. So when I look at his work, it's like I'm seeing how memory sees rather than how life sees.
So let's finish with the last poem in that collection. Actually, in the collected poems, there's 25 pages worth of uncollected poems. So you know, poems that haven't been published in a book form before. But this is the final poem of Afterward now.
Vapor trails. Can you hear me all right? By the way, I don't know why now I asked.
I haven't heard you the whole evening.
Vapor trails. Staring up at pure blue from down on earth, we see them shining in the firmament, the jets, the contrails, gliding back and forth like deep sea fish, soundless and innocent. Their exhaust particles and frozen vapours show us graphically cause and effect. In the silver bullet-nosed jets, the cause. In trails like spinal X-rays, the effect. It only takes a trigger, a single flight in childhood, for example, early trauma, to stretch the bare bones of the aftermath into a lyric void beyond the finite and knowable. A via negativa, cruising at altitude on plumes of breath.